Ducey. Matt Ducey.
It's an honour and a privilege to rise and make a contribution in the social services and housing sector appropriations debate. Can I just start by acknowledging the great work of our Minister, Honourable Anne Tolley, in this space, Mr Chair, totally committed to the young people of New Zealand and the vulnerable young people of New Zealand, and making a difference in their lives and being aspirational for them to expect what every Kiwi kid expects, a great upbringing, Mr Chair. If I reflect on the last week, Mr Chair, I attended the Grey Power meeting in North Canterbury. 200 super sits turned up to that meeting. I was able to have a talk to our superannuitants in North Canterbury. And it's fair to say in North Canterbury our superannuitants are fairly buoyant. I know the member across the House from Waimakariri's down there tomorrow just to touch base in North Canterbury, because they're thinking things are looking good. And it was great in this appropriations and budget 2016, an extra allocation of $41 million for the gold card. And when you look back, it wasn't that long ago in 2008 when there was only a few hundred services available on the gold card, and that's been expanded now to about 12,500. And that's great for superannuitants across the country, but of course in my home patch of Waimakariri, they're grateful of that, Mr Chair. It was interesting over the recess break, a press release, quite confusingly, from Phil Twyford, the opposition spokesperson on housing, sort of the scattergun approach of putting out PRs. He put one out about the temporary housing village in Kaipoi, that it should be used for homelessness. Well, I suppose possibly a good idea. One sort of detractor from that, it's on council land, and I'm sure they can do what they want with that. Secondly, the temporary housing was sold to community providers, but most importantly, as someone wrote in, because Phil Twyford was saying it could address the waiting list in Christchurch, someone wrote into the paper and said, when will Phil Twyford realise Kaipoi is not in Christchurch? So it just goes to show, Mr Chair, that you can have the scattergun approach, but really when you drill down and understand the need. In the Waimak, we have one of the lowest percentage of people on a wait list per head of population. And when you look at the $41 million that was invested in budget 2016 for this appropriations, much needed and will do great work in that space. But what we've got to remember, it's about ensuring that there is housing provision along the whole housing continuum, whether that be community provision, state housing, or private tenure. So I met with Housing New Zealand. We in the Waimak and North Canterbury are going to have more Housing New Zealand houses post-earthquake than we did pre-earthquake. And a large part of that, Mr Chair, is because this government fought very hard to free up land in Canterbury to increase supply to equal demand. And it's simple as that. When you look at annual house price inflation, Waimak, third fastest growing electorate in New Zealand, annual house price inflation of only 2 or 3%. Canterbury, about 5%, and then you get the double-digit annual house price inflation that we're seeing nationally. And I think that is a good example that we can roll out to the rest of the country. By freeing up land, it increases supply and equals demand, and that's around private but also community housing and state housing as well, Mr Chair. I just want to touch on something that has been missing in this debate to balance it up, is the acknowledgement that we spend $25 billion a year in social services, about 12 or 13 billion on superannuation, 7.5 on benefits, a couple of billion on student loans. But the reason we can do that is because we have such a strong and stable economy. We're back in surplus, very low unemployment, high workforce participation, low core crown debt, a GDP growth rate that's the envy of all other OECD countries, because we can have the most ambitious social policies which the opposition will pitch up to us, but the reality is, Mr Speaker, if you can't pay for it, it's all pie in the sky. And the reality is, because of the good management of this government, we can spend $25 billion a year under social service appropriations, Mr Speaker. So I'd like to take the time to acknowledge our Finance Minister and all the great work he does. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Derek Ball.
Please to rise and